Last week, I was having a conversation with a doctor who's a guy I respect immensely. We're typically on the same page with almost everything. But he said to me that HIIT, high intensity interval training, is one of the best ways, if not the best way, to burn visceral fat, the dangerous inflammatory fat that's around your organs. And I said to him, I don't think that's right. And we went back and forth, but I promised him that I would dive into the scientific literature and defend my position. And so what I found is the best way to burn belly fat and visceral fat, it's not HIIT, it's not running, and it for sure as hell is not flapping around on the floor doing these bullshit ab exercises. I can promise you that. But here is what the scientific literature says when it comes down to the best exercise to burn belly fat and visceral fat specifically. A study that makes my doctor friend seem like he's onto something is a pretty robust study. I gotta give it to him. It's a meta-analysis from the British Journal of Sports Medicine done in 2023. It compiled 40 randomized control trials and it had over 2,000 participants, which if you know anything about science, that's a pretty freaking badass study. And so the main takeaway, the main finding of this study was that, quote, exercise produces a dose-dependent reduction in visceral fat that dieting alone does not, even when total calories are equated. Essentially what this means is that you could have a calorie deficit of 500 calories a day, and this could be from diet. So let's say, you just burn 2,000 calories, you don't do any exercise, that's just your basal metabolic rate, and you eat 1,500 calories a day, you're in a 500 calorie deficit, you'll lose fat that way, obviously. That's one way you could lose fat. Other way you could lose fat is, let's say you are focused on your nutrition, but you burn 2,000 calories just at rest, and then you do 500 calories of exercise on top of that, you eat 2,000 calories, right? So in this example, person A, person B, they're both in a 500 calorie deficit. Let's say they both lose a pound of weight per week, but the person who's doing it via exercise is going to lose more visceral fat than the person who's doing it just from diet. And this is also done in a dose-dependent way. So the more exercise you do, to a point, obviously, you can't just exercise all day and expect to burn unlimited amounts of fat, but the study did say in a dose-dependent reduction in visceral fat with exercise, and diet obviously does not do this. Mechanism behind this isn't fully understood, but there is a leading theory. And so the leading theory comes down to two main things. The first is going to be muscle preservation. So let's take these two guys in the example again. Let's say that they're both losing a pound of weight per week. The person who is not exercising, a higher percentage of that weight loss is going to be muscle. They're going to lose both fat and muscle. Whereas the other person who is exercising, they're going to lose probably a little bit of muscle, but definitely way less so than the person who's not exercising. So that's theory number one, it's just muscle preservation. Theory number two comes down to the hormonal response from exercise. So there's obviously a whole cascade of different hormones that happen, that get spiked and released when you do exercise. But two important ones for visceral fat are going to be catecholamines. So this is going to be epinephrine and norepinephrine, and then as well as growth hormone. Catecholamines as well as growth hormone have receptor sites on visceral fat. So when these get released via exercise, they'll latch on to the receptor sites in visceral fat. And we're theorizing, the scientists are theorizing at least, that leads to a higher reduction in visceral fat. To summarize that study from the British Journal of Sports Medicine, exercise does lead to a dose-dependent reduction in visceral fat. We don't know why, but we think it's from muscle preservation as well as a hormone release. As of now, HIIT's looking pretty good. All exercise is looking pretty good. Just do more exercise, you'll burn more visceral fat in a dose-dependent way, right? However, there was another study that took place in 2017, and it was from the Journal of Diabetes Research, and they specifically researched HIIT versus steady state cardio. And if you don't know what this means, so essentially HIIT, there's a bunch of different ways you could do HIIT. Essentially what this is very high intensity. You're going balls to the wall, you're resting, or you're doing low intensity, then you repeat that numerous times. Steady state, it's gonna be lower intensity, probably like 120, 130 beats per minute for a heart rate, and you just sustain that 20, 30, 45 minutes, an hour, doesn't really matter. That's the difference. Low and slow versus high and fast and up and down. What they found, the main takeaway from that study, which was also a really well-constructed study, not as good as the meta-analysis, but pretty good. They found that the same amount of visceral fat was lost in both groups as long as calories were equated. So you will burn more calories much quicker with HIIT than you will with steady state. However, the recovery cost is much more demanding from HIIT than it is from steady state. You can do hours of steady state cardio per week. HIIT, you can't do that much. Your recovery is going to tank. So at this point, we have a fuller picture of the scientific literature when it comes to exercise and fat loss. It seems like all that matters really is just total calories burned at the end of the day, right? While maintaining muscle and being able to spike these specific hormones. A logical conclusion based on the studies that I just kind of explained to you would be, I'm time constrained, I'm busy, let me just do HIIT and burn as many calories as quickly as possible. And frankly, that's the conclusion that many people jump to. This is why people do F45, Orange Theory, they'll sprint, they'll do a bunch of different things, and they'll measure the quality of their exercise by how hard they worked, how much they sweat, how beat up they felt afterwards. There is a grain of truth in that, which makes it dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is because it's not the full picture. Because what happened in these studies and what happens in most studies isn't fully transferable to the real world. Studies happen in a vacuum, they happen in a small timeline, but real life obviously does not happen in a vacuum or a small timeline. And the key to most all body transformation is long timelines, delayed gratification, being able to do something consistently, not for 12 months, but for 12 years, not 12 weeks, not 12 months, 12 years. That's the limitation here. And the limitation of these studies, in my opinion, coaching over 500 guys at this point, what I believe it misses is the costs from HIIT and any high intensity exercise, right? Because there's only so much of that you can do without running into three main consequences. So the first would be injury. In my experience, working with over 500 guys, all over 30, most over 40, is that if you do HIIT for a long enough period of time, you're gonna get injured. I can't tell you how many shoulder, knee, hip injuries I've had to deal with the repercussions of because of them doing HIIT before they started working with me. One, it's annoying for me because I want to get these guys training. But two, nobody wants to be injured. And three, I just said that long timelines is the key to body transformation here. And so if you're injured, that really pulls away long timelines and it pulls away consistency that you can be constantly working out 3, 4, however many days a week over those long time periods. So that's the first one, is injury. The second one is going to be a jacked up cortisol response, and as well as systemic inflammation. And so sure, with HIIT, you're gonna get a release of growth hormone, the catecholamines. That's great short term. That's gonna help with visceral fat. It's gonna help with a bunch of other things as well. However, if you're constantly doing this, you're doing this 4, 5, 6 days a week, your cortisol is gonna be completely dysregulated. Your overall nervous system is gonna be dysregulated. Your sleep is gonna get worse. You're gonna have chronic inflammation that's ultimately gonna lead to issues with insulin sensitivity. It's going to impair your ability to lose visceral fat. So you take this over a long enough time period, you do this chronically, it is going to be a net negative, in my opinion, from that hormonal response perspective. And then the third is just a short-term 2-day thing. So that's NEAT suppression. And NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That's just a fancy way of saying walking around, me moving my hands, talking to you right now. This is all NEAT. I'm burning calories right now. And so when you do high intensity interval training, people used to be like, oh, you get this like post exercise calorie burn, all this kind of shit. Way overstated. What actually happens is you work your ass off and then you're tired for the rest of the day and you don't move as much consciously and subconsciously. And let's say you burn 500 calories in your 45-minute F45 class, but honestly, it kind of cancels itself out because you're not going to want to do the steps the rest of the day. And your overall unconscious movement is going to go down as well. So it's a net even, maybe, in my opinion, from a NEAT perspective. So for those three reasons, HIIT has a real cost. And I don't believe the benefits of HIIT outweigh the costs, at least if you're doing it as your main form of exercise. So what I think is far better is this. It's a combination of resistance training and walking. And here's why. There's a concept you need to understand, and it's a stress bucket. So your body doesn't know the difference between resistance training, being in a calorie deficit, a fight with your wife, the news, blue light at night. Like, these are all forms of stressors. And modern life has a lot of stressors. Modern life is a motherfucker. Let's just call it how it is, right? If you're in a calorie deficit to lose weight, which you need to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight, that is not an argument, that is a fact. That's a stressor. It's a relatively big stressor. And so your exercise needs to keep that in mind. If you're in a calorie surplus, if you're in a calorie maintenance, you can do more volume, you can do higher intensity training because you're in an anabolic state, you have more raw material to work with, your stress is going to be handled much better. But if you're in a calorie deficit, it's the complete opposite. So your training needs to reflect that. And that's why a combination of resistance training and walking is very low stress on the body. And it manages your overall systemic load and your stress bucket very well. And so if we talk about the main things that are needed for visceral fat loss, at least from the studies that I reference perspective, one is going to be muscle preservation. Resistance training is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world at maintaining muscle, especially in a calorie deficit. The growth hormone and catecholamine spike, you're going to get that from resistance training, and it's going to be a better, smoother one than from HIIT. And then third would be calorie burn. So, obviously walking for 10 minutes, HIIT for 10 minutes, you're going to get more calorie burn in the HIIT, but then there's the NEAT suppression that I talked about as well. And also you can walk 8,000 to 12,000 steps a day, every single day. So you can be consistent with your calorie burn. And 8,000 to 12,000 steps a day is not crazy. You can fit this into your day, just taking calls on a walk, parking further away, doing a 20-minute walk post dinner. Like, you can easily fit this in your day every single day and do this very consistently, right? So it satisfies all three buckets necessary for visceral fat loss, while also managing your overall stress level, which is going to allow you to do this consistently, which is a prerequisite for anything you do when it comes to fitness or health, in my opinion. And it's also going to allow you to do it sustainably. And one of my biggest ethos is you shouldn't do anything for 12 weeks that you don't see yourself doing for the next 12 years. That's really the key to all this. So resistance training, 3 to 4 days a week, real program. You really don't need to be doing that much, 8,000 to 12,000 steps a day. That is the best way to lose visceral fat, hands down.